verse 8. And is Carl Rothman on? I don't hear it. Anyway, Carl Rothman is sponsoring this class in memory of our father, Henry, Cheskel, Shmuel. May he have an elevation in Gan Eden, and may his memory always be a blessing to you. Again, we're on chapter 20, book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 8, in the middle of the 10 utterances. And it says, Zochor es Yom HaShabbos Hakadosh. We briefly touched upon it last week. We ended up with it. Remember the Sabbath to sanctify it. And now the question is like this: we have a basic principle, I should say, that any positive commandment that is governed by a particular time, women are exempt. Now, based on this principle, women should not have to keep Shabbos, because Shabbat only comes once a week. It's a time-limited mitzvah. So, but that's not true. So why is it that women are obligated to keep the Shabbat? Anyone have an answer to that? Okay.
Hashem created the world for everyone.
That's good. I didn't hear that answer. That's a good thing. Okay. The answer that the Gemara brings out. It says, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. Now here, remember twice the 10 utterances are mentioned. And here in this Pasha Yitro, and also in Deuteronomy, B'Eschanan, it mentions the observance of Shabbat with a different change. Instead of saying, remember the Sabbath, it says, Shomor, guard the Sabbath. Now, the way it's interpreted by our rabbis, Zochor refers to the positive aspects of Shabbat. Shamor refers to the negative things you cannot do on Shabbat. And we know when it comes to the negative mitzvos, women are obligated. So therefore, they are obligated to observe the Sabbath. And here it says over here, let me quote a Gemara from Brachos, it says the following. It relates to what we just said. Omer Rav Ada bar Abba. Rav Acha bar Abba said the following. Noshim chayavos b'kiddush yod b'Torah. Women are obligated to be involved in kiddush, to make kiddush, sanctifying the day of the Sabbath, and he says it's from the Torah. But he says, like I just mentioned before, although it's a time-limited mitzvah, and we have a principle that all positive mitzvahs that are time-limited, women are exempt. So if that's the case, why should they observe? Why should they be obligated to observe Shabbos? But the answer is the Amakro, Zachor v'Shamor. Over here it says, remember the Sabbath. In the Pasha Beschanan in Deuteronomy, it says, Shamor, guard it, meaning that referring to the negative parts. Kol sheyeshno b'shmira, yeshno b'tzchira. All those who are obligated in guarding it, meaning not to transgress it, not to do anything that is prohibited in a negative sense, all the don'ts, automatically they're involved in Zachor, to remember the positive aspects. And says, and since women are obligated in guarding it, they're not allowed to transgress any of the negative parts of Shabbos, automatically they're obligated to observe the Sabbath. We have a similar thing by Pesach. Let's take the mitzvah of eating matzah. Based on the principle that a mitzvah that's time limited, women should be exempt from eating matzah on Pesach. So, but that's not true. Women are obligated to eat matzah. So why are you obligated if it's time limited? Do we ever speak about that? It's very similar to what we said over here. Since you're obligated, the negative mitzvahs of the Torah. And one of the negative mitzvahs that pertains to Pesach is don't eat chametz. So, and the same logic is used in the Gemara when they pose that question. Just like we see that women are obligated in the negative mitzvah, do not eat chametz, therefore automatically they're involved in the mitzvah to go ahead and eat matzah. The same thing over here. Since you're obligated in all the negative parts of the Shabbat, consequently, you go ahead, you're automatically obligated in the positive part of Shabbos, and therefore women are definitely obligated on a total level to observe Shabbat. Okay. However, there are some mitzvahs where you're definitely not obligated. There are many positive mitzvahs pertaining to Yom Tov, let's say, that you're not obligated to do. What about hearing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah? Is a positive obligation to listen to the blowing of the shofar. Are women obligated to listen to shofar?
No.
No. And really, Torah, it's no. Women, over the years, as you always see from the synagogue attendance, you find women want to be obligated to do so. So they are there, but technically speaking, they are exempt. But women have taken that obligation upon themselves, and we find women doing it. Same with Lulav and Esrog. Truth of the matter is, women are exempt from benching Lulav and Esrog, or sitting in the sukkah for that matter. But if women, when we say they're exempt, doesn't mean they don't have to do it, they're prohibited from doing it. It all means that they're not obligated to do so. But if they want to do it, they certainly can. And so many women they'll bench with Lulav and Esrog, or eat in the sukkah for that matter. Same thing about sukkah. Women are not obligated to eat in the sukkah. So many women do. This is fine, but because they had taken upon themselves that particular obligation. So we see sometimes women are exempt from the mitzvah, but nevertheless they have taken it on as an obligation. On Shabbat, although it's time limited to only Shabbat, but since the negative parts they're obligated to do from the Torah, therefore they're obligated from the Torah to observe Shabbos, and the same thing with eating matzah, since they are obligated in the negative commandment is do not eat chametz, they're automatically obligated from the Torah to eat matzah. Okay.
I don't understand if you have the negative commandment, why automatically do you have to, right? You could not eat matzah and not, right? You could not eat matzah, right? Or you can.
But can you eat bread?
You cannot eat chametz without having to eat matzah.
That's true. You're right, but the concept that it seems that as said in the Talmud, we are told that again this must be from the oral tradition that if once a woman is obligated the negative parts of that mitzvah, automatically they're obligated in the positive parts.
And so what makes that automatic?
That's because that's the halacha, the Moshe Sinai. That's the way it's interpreted by the oral tradition. If it wasn't for that particular point from the oral tradition, by right you should be obligated. But this particular point that if you're obligated in all the negative aspects of the mitzvah, automatically you're obligated in the positive aspects. That's by Pesach and by Shabbos. That's when that logic is used. All right? Or if it wasn't for that, you wouldn't have to keep Shabbat or eat matzah on Pesach. Okay.
But there's no explanation of why that is.
All I could say is a lot of times the Torah doesn't say things, but we know it based on an oral tradition.
Okay.
And it's this. I mean, we even had the same thing when it came. We just covered the book of Ruth. Remember, what does it say in the Torah? A Moabite or an Ammonite cannot enter in the congregation of Israel. Moabites and Ammonites cannot marry a Jewish person, a biological Jew. But you know that's an exception to the rule when it came to the females. Now, how do I know that? How does anybody know that? Because it doesn't say in the Torah, but that's the oral tradition, that's the exception. So that's why it's so important that when we talk about accepting the Torah, we have to remember that there were two Torahs that were given at Mount Sinai. The written tradition, we call the five books of Moses, but also the oral tradition. And of course, later on, we wrote it down because the sages, I think must have been close to 1900 years ago, decided to write down the oral tradition or else it'll be forgotten. So they started out with the mission. I think it was like 100 and some odd years after the destruction of the Second Holy Temple. Could you imagine that? Until that point, the oral tradition was not officially written down. Maybe there were certain notes here and there. People wrote certain fragments of it down, but it wasn't officially written as a volume. First it came Mishnayot, and it was added to the Talmud. It took hundreds of years to totally write the whole thing down. The Jerusalem Talmud was completed, I think, in circa 300 CE, and the Babylonian Talmud, that is usually used most frequently in the yeshiva world, was completed in 500 CE. When we finally got the whole oral tradition down. But then after that came commentaries upon commentaries. So it was a procedure that took many, many years to have. But interesting, during the time of the Second Holy Temple, the oral tradition was not written down. Did not come about till later on. Oh boy. So you're talking about David HaMelech and Shlomo and all our heroes, Mordechai, they never had the Gemara. They didn't know what that was. They might have known the oral tradition, but it's not officially written. Okay. The same thing when it talks about Shabbos, as just mentioned. Same thing with that. Oh. Now we had the Lag BaOmer last week, and unfortunately, a terrible incident happened. But it is that Lag BaOmer is the also what famous town, what famous rabbi's yahrzeit was Lag BaOmer. In fact, that's why they go to Maron. Who was buried by Maron?
Shimon ben Yochai.
Right, Shimon ben Yochai. And he happened to say something that pertains to Shabbos after he came out of the cave. After he was told that the Romans were not after him anymore. Look what the Gemara says about him. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. This was his yahrzeit. I want to mention it. He happened. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, after he came out of the cave, and it seems like the Romans were not interested in pursuing him anymore and killing him. He happened to see a certain person, the Noket Madani Asa, that he was holding two bunches. In fact, he was running with two bunches of hadassim, myrtles. Barahi in Ashmash Shabbos was very close to Shabbos, and he's running with these two bouquets of myrtles. Amalei, Hani Lomalach. So Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai didn't understand, why do you have this? Why are you holding these two bunches of myrtles? And look what he said. Amalei v'chol Shabbat. He said, I'm bringing these myrtles home for the honor of Shabbat. Amalei v'tazilei b'chad. So Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said, why do you have to have two bunches? One suffice? So what do you think he answered?
Just like you have two chalot.
Yeah. So the Amalei said, Echad kineged zochor. One corresponds to the first group of the utterances, says, remember the Sabbath. The Echad kineged shamor. And one refers to the second one of shamor. So I bring him home two bunches of whatever myrtles, whatever they were. It was nice. It had a nice aroma. The myrtles of the four species that we do in sukkos. The myrtles have the nicest aroma. So maybe at that period of time, they used to use myrtles to bring home to their house on Shabbat. But they had two of them. And you're right. That's why we have two chalot. Why do we have two chalot? Or two rolls, or two matzahs? Could be something two. So again, because Zachor v'Shamor, corresponding to remember and to observe, and the other reason is when the manna fell, when the man fell, a double portion fell on Friday. So we have a double portion of two chalot. Okay. Let's go further now. The Shabbos, the kachot, to sanctify it. Now, does it say anything about wine over here? Does it say any place that I have to use wine to sanctify the Sabbath? You find it here?
No.
No, it doesn't say it. So why do we do it?
We have to sanctify it. That's how we sanctify it.
But does the Torah say have to use wine?
You don't have to use wine.
So may Torah, how what would suffice when it comes to sanctifying the Shabbos? You don't even have to use wine on a Torah level, but how do we sanctify the Sabbath?
It has to be different from all the other days.
No, okay. Let me really from the Torah, strictly talking from a biblical point of view. Biblically speaking, if you just daven, you can say like in Amida, the Shemona Esrei on Friday night, where it talks about the Sabbath, just a verbal proclamation about it, that would suffice. So if it happened, I mean, it usually doesn't, but if it happened that you don't have any wine, you don't have any grape juice, something like that, but you just totally forgot that you didn't have it in the house, just by having a verbal proclamation that you meant it in the Amida, that would suffice to sanctify the Sabbath. A verbal proclamation to sanctify the Sabbath. Midrabanan, that's only rabbinical. From the rabbis, we're told that since Shabbat is such an important day, not just a verbal proclamation, but you should use wine.
Well, what about candles? Is candles the same reason?
Yeah, you're right. There's no, I think we mentioned that last week. There's no place that says in the Torah women light candles for Shabbat. But since it's a nice thing to do, it shows the greatness of Shabbat, and women prepare a Friday for the Shabbat. So they have a special mitzvah to light candles. But that's also midrabanan, only rabbinically speaking.
What was the thinking that the Rabbanim thought of the women?
Because you work very seriously, because women usually work very hard in the preparation of Shabbat, getting the meals done, prepared, and so on. So they were given the special mitzvah to usher in the Shabbat by lighting the candles. And you have a special bracha. And the same thing with Yom Tov. Women light candles for Yom Tov. There is a time when a man could light candles. When can a man light candles?
When there's no woman.
Right? They're not married, or then they could light candles too. But the mitzvah is that women should go ahead and light candles. But that's again, it's rabbinical. It's not mehatorah. Okay, man. And here is something the Gemara says that we don't practice today. I'm going to just read you a Gemara that says this, the following. Omar Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov said the following. When you make Kiddush on Shabbat, you have to recall going to Exodus from Egypt. And he makes an association, which is known as a Gezerah Shava, that comes from Sinai. He makes an observation where you compare the day of Exodus from Egypt with Shabbat. It is the following. Because of verse that comes from Deuteronomy, where it says, you must remember the day you departed from Egypt. And the Zachor. No, here what does it say? Remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. So he's comparing the Exodus from Egypt to Shabbat, and by means of comparing two words. This was Gezerah Shava. Again, this comes from Sinai. We cannot go ahead and make these up ourselves. This is known as Gezerah Shava. But the problem is like this. According to this Gemara, it says that we should recall the Exodus from Egypt during Kiddush. But if you look at Kiddush Friday night, you don't recall it.
Says Yom Shishi.
Yeah, but what does it say? Zecha, what do we call? To remind us of?
Maaseh Bereshit.
Maaseh Bereshit is creation.
Yeah.
If you look at the whole Kiddush, you don't find anything about the going out of Egypt. It's not on a Shabbat Kiddush. So it's a very big problem over here.
Because it starts with Yom Shishi.
So
that's the line of creation, right?
Right, I agree with you. But according to this Gemara, I should also mention about the Exodus of Egypt. Just I have to remember the Sabbath. It says Zachor. It mentions by the Exodus of Egypt, the Mount Cisco, you have to remember. And according to this Gemara, it's a Gezerah Shava. It's from Sinai, where just like we have to remember Shabbat, we must also remember the Exodus of Egypt when you make Kiddush. But we don't. We ourselves don't have it in the text of our Kiddush. So it's a big problem. The Gemara says you should, that we don't. But anyway, there is a commentary on it that it seems like that at one time there was a text that some of our, I think Rashi has it, that in their text it mentions not only the Masa Bereshis, the creation of the earth, but also the going out of Egypt. So it would say, remind us of the creation of the world. It also said, and also to remind us of the Exodus from Egypt, based on this Gemara. However, it seems like as the years went by, that phrase has been omitted. I don't know why. I took him to talk to me. He doesn't know why either. It was omitted. And we only talk about the creation of the world. Okay, so interestingly enough, the Gemara says you should mention the Exodus of Egypt also in the Kiddush, which we don't do.
But according to you, we had Shabbos in Mitzrayim in the last 6 months.
According to me, it's a midrash. I know what you're referring to. This goes back to a midrash. You're right. And where Moshe had his audience with Paro, and he said to him, let my people go. So Paro said to him that, the people are lazy. They don't want to do work. That's why they want to leave. So Moshe Rabbeinu told Paro, well, you know why? They don't have a day off. If we'll give them a day off, they'll be able to work better for you. And somehow, according to the Midrash, Paro agreed to that, and he gave them Shabbat off. And that's why maybe that's why, according to that this Gemara, you mentioned in Kiddush to remind us of the going out of Egypt. Although that's not our practice. But you're right. Okay. Where are we now? Go further. Yeah. Mentioned before that over here it says Zohor, remember the Sabbath. And what does it say in Pasuk Eskanan? What? It's a different word.
Tomorrow.
It says Zohor. Right?
Tomorrow.
Shamar, yeah. Now, I want to ask you this question. Let's see if you. No, I don't know if I ever mentioned this. We have the Chododi song on Friday night.
Mm-hmm.
That
It says Shamar v'Zachor there.
So there, in the first paragraph, it says Shamar v'Zachor b'dibur echad. That Shamar and Zachor, God, and remember the Sabbath, was said simultaneously by God. Only God could say two words at one time. But if you look, but his I'm sure Shlomo Alkabis, who was the author, knew that the word Zachor is mentioned first in the Torah, and then Shamar, and guard the Torah, guard the Sabbath, is mentioned later on. So why does he switch it around? Why does he say Shamar v'Zachor b'dibur echad?
Because he wanted his name on it.
Very good. The author of the Chododi was Shlomo Alkabis. So he wanted, and if you look at every paragraph, the first letter of every paragraph is spelled Shlomo Halevi. So if he mentioned Zachor first, he wouldn't have the shin for Shlomo. So he switched only. So that's why he inverted it and said Shamor b'Zachor b'du echad. But really, it was the opposite way. You're remembering and guarding said the same said simultaneously. And then the question is why? Why did God have to say Shamor v'Zachor simultaneously? It's impossible to say two words at one time, but God did so. Why did he do that? Okay. I think we mentioned it last week. We said that Zachor, remember the Sabbath, that you should remember the Sabbath even during the week. How do you remember the Sabbath during the week?
You say every day, first day of the week, second day, one day to Shabbos, right?
That's correct. That's why it's real. We always relate to the Sabbath. Or Shammai had an interesting idea. You went ahead, if you saw some food that he liked, a good piece of meat, some fish, or whatever it was, he would buy this is for the Shabbat. So you're always remembering the Sabbath during the week. Same thing, you want to buy garments or something very special. Oh, I want to buy that particular garment for Shabbat. That's such a nice garment I see. So this is our custom, right? Okay, so that's why we want to remember the Sabbath before it comes. And Shamor means while the Shabbat is in, you should go and extend it and keep it a little longer. See, remember, so, or others want to say Zachor. You remember, you never notice when you do ladies like Shabbat candles, you do it about 18 to 20 minutes before sundown. But when it comes to Shabbat night, when do you end Shabbat? At least when the stars come out. Oh, so then there's a problem over here. It's really a contradiction of what we're doing. The whole idea is that we remember Shabbat before it comes, and Shabbat starts when the candle lighting is. So when should Shabbat end? Before sundown, right? Just like candles before sundown, Shabbat, because Shabbat is starting at that particular time before sundown. So Sundays should begin also before sundown comes. So we should end Shabbos then. But on the other hand, what do? We end Shabbat usually by Tzeit HaKochavim, but the stars come out. Well, if Sunday starts when the stars come out, well, maybe Saturday should end. We start Shabbos when the stars come out. What we do is a contradiction. If the Shabbat starts right before sundown, Shabbat should end before sundown. If Shabbat ends when the stars come out, Shabbat should start when the stars come out on Friday night. But yet we send it on both ends. So since it's a contradiction in terms, therefore, when God said these two words, remember and guard, he said it simultaneously, that although this is a contradiction in terms, but nevertheless, remember Shabbat before it actually starts, like we do, before sundown. And Shomor, guard it until after the stars come out, when the stars come out. So we extend it on both ends. And therefore, God said these two terms simultaneously because they contradict one another. Okay? Now, where else do you find that? A couple of times you find out where God says the same thing simultaneously because it really contradicts each part contradicts the other part. For example, what is shatnez? What is shatnez? We say shatnez or shatnez.
Linen and wool together.
Right? You're not allowed to have linen and wool together. That's correct. Where do you have an exception, at least from the Torah? There's an exception where...
No.
What?
The Kohen.
Yeah, the Kohanim, right? And also from the Torah, I'm not saying what we do today, from the Torah, it's perfectly permitted to have, let's say, a linen garment and woolen tzitzis. Today, we can't do that. So I'll tell you why first, I'll tell you why later, why you can't do it. But technically speaking, that would be permitted. So therefore, the Gemara says that these two verses do not wear shatnez, and also you must make tzitzis for yourself, was said simultaneously. Because from the strictly speaking from the Torah, I'm allowed to have a garment, a woolen garment, and a linen garment and a woolen tzitzis. That would be perfectly okay. But we don't do it. Why don't we do it today? God said those two mitzvot, do not wear shatnez, and you must have tzitzis on your talis, said it simultaneously.
We might forget.
What? Which we permit.
We might forget.
No, which we permit wool, and according to the Torah, a woolen garment and a linen garment and woolen tzitzis would be permitted. Do it. Today we don't do that. The reasons like this. What is techelet? There's something about tzitzis you have techelet. What is techelet?
Purple dye on the wall.
Yeah, we don't know exactly where it comes from, but it's a bluish, a purplish, purple color dye. It comes from some worm or some sort of fish. We're not certain where it is. We don't know how to identify it. So therefore, we don't do it today. But if we would know how to do it, you have your white tzitzis, and one would have to be this techelet. We call it techelet. a bluish dye that be permitted to be used, even though it be shabbos. We don't have a linen garment and woolen tzitzis. We don't do it today, which we don't know the particular fish or worm, but it comes from this particular dye.
But I've seen so many people lately with tchelis on it.
Yeah, because they think they know what it is. They're not positive. They think they know. I also wear the bluish. I have one of my strands is bluish, but again, it's we're not positive. That's why I wouldn't never wear it with a linen garment. I have those the woolen tzitzis with that bluish dye, the tchelis that they sell. We're not positive. So, but if it is, if they, according to many, it is the right tchelis, then you're doing a good mitzvah. And then let me see what else. Again, I'll go back to Shabbos. It says, you must remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. And in the same breath, when God mentioned it, he said another verse that when you offer sacrifices on the Sabbath day, on Yom Shabbos, you should slaughter 2 sheep as a sacrifice to God on Shabbat. And what's wrong with that? There's something very wrong about that.
You can't offer a sacrifice on Shabbat.
You can't. That's
You
just
can't slaughter an animal.
You can't slaughter. It's a shechita. You cannot do shochet. They don't slaughter animals on Shabbat for meat. No, but nevertheless, when the Beit HaMikdash stood, they had animal sacrifice. They had to slaughter the animal. So therefore, again, when God spoke to Moshe about Shabbat, simultaneously he said, you must offer 2 sheep as a sacrifice in Shabbat because they're contradictory. So he said it simultaneously, which would permit the offering of sheep on Shabbat. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Okay, I think that's that. I think this we also mentioned. Okay, just to repeat it. What Rabbi said so. Rabbi Omer, Shabbos, remember the Sabbath. So the Gemara says, don't count or don't relate the days of the week like others do. They have special days, Monday, Tuesday, different days. We always call it, you have no names. Other than Shabbat, there's no Hebrew names for the weekdays. So that, again, now another way of us remembering the Shabbat when we recite the Psalm of the day. And those are, by the way, those Psalms of the day that we recite were recited when the sacrifices were offered. They were singing. The Levium were singing psalms and playing instruments when the sacrifices went on. So at that point, they would sing the Psalm of the day. So that's another reason why we do the Psalm of the day, to remind us of the service in the Holy Temple. One more passage. Verse 9. Sheishes yomim ta'avod v'yosizekom lachtecha. 6 days you could work and do all your labor. Okay. I think I brushed on this question last time, and it's really Mechilta. Mechilta's question was very simple. Are you trying to tell me that a person can complete all his work within 6 days? And you always have something else to do. It's very hard to say all my work is done. No. So what does the Torah mean? Is do all your work. So it says, El Shavos b'Shabbos. We want you to go ahead and rest on Shabbat. Ki ilu kol malachta asuya. As if, or you should think to yourself, even though I have work to be done, but on Shabbat, I think to myself, forget about my work. It's a day of rest. I don't want to think about what I have to do. I might want to concentrate on the sanctity of the Shabbat, and maybe study Torah, look over the Parsha, sing Zemirot, and have a Shabbat feeling, and forget about all the weekday activities. That's what it means. And
In the time of the Holy Temple, did the people who didn't live near the Holy Temple have a Shabbos goy?
oh, Shabbos, you didn't do that. I know. But even then, with a Shabbos guy, you have to have he has to be salaried for let's say work that he does throughout the week. It'll help you on the Shabbat. You're not really, according to Allah, you're not, unless it's an emergency. You can't go over to a non-Jew and say, put on this light for me, or put on my television, or cook for me on Shabbat. You can't do that. It's called Amir al-Akum. You're not allowed to do that. You could go ahead and before the Sabbath, that's part of his job, is to go ahead and take you, like we have in the shul. Look, we have air conditioning on the synagogue. Now, I don't tell them, none of us told the maintenance men to put on the air conditioning. But they know that they do that automatically. Or they need steam, or whatever it may be. They know what has to be done. We cannot go over to one of our maintenance men in the synagogue on Shabbat and say, it's cold in the synagogue, maybe to put on the steam. You can hint and say, this is what I usually say, it's very cold in the synagogue. And hopefully they'll understand what I'm saying. I don't tell them to put on the steam, or vice versa. If it's too hot in the synagogue, I don't say, Freddie, could you put on the air conditioning? I say, it's so hot in the synagogue, or something like that. And so he should know what I mean, like a hint to him. But I cannot say put on the air conditioning on the warm days if it's too hot in the synagogue. Things like that.
Can you hire someone for only Shabbat, or he has to have a job during the week too?
Usually they try to give a job throughout the week to do something,
Because Colin Powell always talked about, he grew up in the Bronx, and he was the Shabbos guy for all the shuls in the Bronx.
Who was this?
Colin Powell.
Really? I didn't know that. You tell a story. This was an unfortunate thing that there was a shtibel in Borough Park, and they hired somebody to turn on lights on Shabbat and so on. But one time, he tells the shtibel, I can't come next Shabbat to turn the lights on. It's my bar mitzvah. But they didn't know he was even a Jew. They thought he was a guy. He used to put on the lights for them on Shabbos. It's a true story. So he told him that he had to get a bar mitzvah. Okay. Let's see. Where are we? Let me do one more thing. Oh, yeah, here's another thing that our sages say. Well, in the beginning of the next verse, it says, verse 10 says, Yom HaShu Shabbos L'Shem Elokecha. On the seventh day, it's Shabbos to God. Now, the way it's at least one interpretation that it says, what do you mean it's Shabbos to God? So he said, Mahu Shabbos mimam, Mahu Shabbos mimamar, Avato Shvos mimamar. That even when it comes to talk on the Sabbath, let's try to limit our talk to more spiritual things, Torah, prayer, Zmiros, things like that. It's not an easy thing. It's like something to work on. To just like God stopped speaking, He didn't speak or create anything on the Sabbath day. We also should refrain from talking mundane talk. It should be more spiritual, davening and Torah discussions, things like that, which is not easy to do. But it's something, it's a goal that we could work on. It might take a while to do, but that would be the ideal way of observing Shabbat, through studying Torah, davening, seeing Zmiros, and keep away from politics. It should be talking about politics on Shabbat, which would not be not something we should speak about at Shabbat. Speak something more that's holy and sanctity in it. All right. Let's end it over here. So have a wonderful Shabbat. I think things are clearing up. I think more people are coming to shul on Shabbat. Hope I'll see you coming back. Hope so, as soon as possible. And so have Shabbat Shalom. By the way, any other questions?
Shabbat shalom.